The table was set with crisp white linen, the fine china glistening under the soft morning light that filtered in through the large bay windows. Linda Gale stood at the center of it all. Her house, her rules. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the delicate perfume of croissants, bacon, and eggs, filling the spacious dining room of her upscale suburban home. It should have been a scene of warmth and comfort, but the tension between the people gathered around the table was palpable. Chloe sat across from Linda, her posture perfect, hands delicately folded around her coffee cup. Her eyes never strayed from the center of the conversation, her voice commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Linda watched, her sharp gaze taking in every exaggerated laugh, every practiced smile. Chloe had an air of control about her, a control Linda had come to recognize, and one that now felt a little too heavy in her presence. "Of course, darling, I told you I'd take care of the garden this weekend. I can't stand how messy it looks." Chloe's voice was sweet, but there was an underlying edge to it, the kind that made it clear she believed her role was far more important than anyone else's in this room. She was speaking to Travis, who was nodding dutifully beside her. Travis, Linda's son, leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched as Chloe continued to dominate the conversation. He tried to look relaxed, but Linda could see the subtle tension in his face, the same tension that had been building between them for years. Linda felt the faintest tug at the back of her mind, a decision starting to form. But she didn't act on it just yet. She sipped her coffee slowly, watching the spectacle unfold. She had seen it all before. Chloe, always the center of attention, and Travis, quietly deferring to his wife, unwilling, or perhaps incapable, of stepping out of her shadow. But Linda had had enough of being a silent observer in her own house. "Chloe," Linda's voice cut through the noise, calm and deliberate. "I noticed some charges on my debit card last week. Mind explaining them to me?" The question hung in the air for a beat, as if it didn't quite belong. Chloe's smile faltered just for a moment before she composed herself. "Oh, that? Travis probably forgot to mention it," she said with a practiced smile. "I used it to buy some new clothes for the office. You know, just sprucing up my wardrobe." Linda's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not talking about clothes, Chloe. I'm talking about the utility bill. Car insurance. You were using my card for those." A faint flush crept up Chloe's neck, but she quickly hid it beneath the veil of her usual charm. "Ah well," Chloe's voice dropped an octave. "Sometimes we forget to transfer the payments. You know how it is." She shrugged it off, as though the explanation were trivial. Linda's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. She kept her tone neutral. "It's not trivial to me. It's my account. My finances." At the mention of money, Travis shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He slammed his fork down on the table with an exaggerated motion, making the silverware clink loudly against the plate. His face flushed red with embarrassment, and Linda could see the tightness in his jaw. The way he fought to maintain control over his emotions. "Can we not do this here?" Travis muttered, his voice low but sharp, his eyes darting around the table. He didn't want to make a scene, but the frustration was evident in every line of his face. Jenny, Travis's wife, let out a small, dismissive laugh. "You know how she gets," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Always looking for something to complain about." Sophie, Linda's granddaughter, sat at the edge of the table, her face flushed bright red. It wasn't from embarrassment over her grandmother's behavior. It was because of what was unfolding before her eyes, her parents bickering over something so trivial, and the tension that seemed to build with every word. Linda's heart tightened as she looked at Sophie. The teenager's face was a portrait of discomfort, her gaze shifting from one parent to the other. She wasn't embarrassed by Linda. No, Sophie was embarrassed by the selfishness she saw in her parents, by their refusal to accept responsibility for their actions, their inability to see the damage they were causing. Linda didn't respond right away. She knew this wasn't the right moment to escalate things. She didn't need to yell or argue. She had spent years cultivating a sense of control over her family's financial situation, and now she was slowly reeling it back in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She placed her coffee cup down with quiet precision, her eyes sweeping over the table, lingering on each of them. "I've always been understanding," Linda said quietly, her voice firm but calm. "But understand this. I won't stand for being disrespected in my own home. This needs to change." The weight of her words hung in the room like a storm cloud. Chloe opened her mouth to say something, but the words died in her throat. Travis shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening, the realization of what had just transpired sinking in. Linda's eyes locked onto Travis for a moment, her expression unreadable. She had no intention of letting him or Chloe get away with this. Not anymore. Sophie sat back in her chair, still red-faced, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't say anything, but her silent support didn't go unnoticed by Linda. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Linda allowed it to hang for a moment longer before pushing her chair back and standing up. She had made her point, and now she would take the next steps, quietly, strategically. Linda Gale wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. She was a force to be reckoned with. And if anyone doubted that, they were about to learn how far she would go to protect what was hers. The game had only just begun. The hum of the house felt quieter now, the bustling energy of the brunch over, replaced by a stillness that clung to the air. Linda sat at the dining room table, the remnants of breakfast cleared away, but the sense of unresolved tension still lingered. Her eyes, sharp and methodical, scanned the cluttered surface of the table where she had laid out receipts, account statements, and the papers she had pulled from her filing cabinet. She sat unmoving, her fingers gently tracing the edges of a stack of records. The late-night thoughts she'd had after the brunch swirled in her mind. She hadn't been imagining things. Chloe's casual dismissal, Travis's reluctant compliance, and the way Jenny waved off Linda's concerns like they didn't matter. It had gone too far. And now it was time to take the first step toward regaining control. She picked up a pencil, her fingers slow but steady as she began to record every charge from the previous months. Car insurance, utilities, groceries, all on her debit card, all without her consent. The numbers weren't exorbitant, but the principle behind them burned deep. Linda had spent decades building her life, her wealth, and now these small but steady intrusions felt like violations. The transactions were too consistent, too calculated. Each entry printed on her bank statements made it clear Travis was using her account for his own convenience. The thought sent a sharp pang of frustration through Linda, the very thing she had spent her life protecting, now being taken without her say. She moved methodically, checking each charge against her financial records, the ink of her pencil digging into the paper with every number she wrote. She'd been trained for this, looking for the fine print, understanding the fine balance between control and carelessness. There was no room for emotional missteps now. Only clarity. Linda paused, her breath steadying as she leaned back in her chair. It wasn't just about the money, it was the complete disregard for boundaries, for respect. This wasn't just about her son's entitlement or Chloe's manipulation, it was about a lifetime of being overlooked, of being underestimated. She pulled her phone from her bag and quickly typed a message to Marcus. "Can we review every joint account? I want a full breakdown, including every charge Travis has made in the last year. No exceptions." Her thumb hesitated over the send button as the weight of the request settled on her. Marcus had been her colleague, her confidant, and more importantly, her trusted ally. He'd been there when she made the big decisions, and now he would help her ensure that no further damage was done. He'd help her pull the strings, just as he had when they first discussed the importance of safeguarding her financial future. A chime broke the silence. Sophie's message had come through. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Sophie's words were simple, but there was a depth to them. Linda could feel her granddaughter's concern, the sense of empathy Sophie had always shown even when the adults around her seemed oblivious. Linda stared at the message for a long moment, the weight of Sophie's caring nature reminding her of the sacrifices she had made. Sacrifices not just for her son, but for the legacy she hoped to leave behind. She'd allowed herself to be the matriarch, the caretaker, the one who would make things right for everyone else. But what had it cost her? Her mind drifted for a second, her thoughts briefly skimming over the family history, the years spent climbing up the corporate ladder, the long nights spent ensuring there was always enough for everyone, the financial acumen that had allowed her to give so much. And yet, here she was, sitting in her own home, watching her son and daughter-in-law take without a second thought. Linda's fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised but still. She needed time to think. She needed to make sure her next step wasn't just another reaction. She had to act, and she had to act smart. Finally, she placed her phone down without replying to Sophie's message. She wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, she refocused her attention on the stack of papers before her. The decision she had made wasn't just a response to Travis's manipulation. It was about securing the future, about showing her family that there was a price to be paid for disrespect. The money wasn't the issue. The principle was. The paper records in front of her were the tools, the instruments that would allow her to regain control. But the real power lay in her ability to see things through, to make them understand that their actions had consequences. She wouldn't be ignored any longer. She sat back in her chair, a final, quiet determination settling over her. The game had just begun, and Linda Gale had no intention of losing. The phone buzzed again, but this time, Linda didn't even look at it. She was already one step ahead. The groundwork was laid, and soon, Travis and Chloe would understand just how far her patience could stretch before it snapped. The house was quiet when Linda sat at the dining table, a far cry from the chaos of the morning. The sun had shifted, casting soft rays through the window and over the table. Linda's fingers idly traced the rim of her coffee cup, still half full, as her mind worked. She had just taken the first real step in taking control of her family's financial affairs, and already, she knew that things were about to escalate. It was no longer about just managing her money. It was about reclaiming the power that had slipped away from her in the past few years. She reached for her phone, her eyes briefly skimming over the contact list before selecting Marcus's name. He was more than a credit officer. He was a safeguard, a loyal ally who understood just how deeply her family had taken advantage of her trust. She tapped the screen, typing out a brief message. Remove Travis from the list of authorized users. Immediately. Set a $200 emergency-only limit. Auto-decline for all large purchases. Her finger hovered over the send button for a moment, then she pressed it firmly. There was no going back now. The phone buzzed almost immediately, and Marcus's reply came through. Got it. I'll have everything updated as soon as possible. Let me know if you need anything else. Linda set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, her chest tight as a surge of determination swept over her. For the first time in years, she was doing what needed to be done, not for her son, not for Chloe, but for herself. She had given so much, been so accommodating, and now it was time to recalibrate the balance. Her mind turned to the passwords, the pins, the access to the wealth she had spent a lifetime amassing. It wasn't just about securing her accounts anymore. It was about ensuring that no one, least of all Travis, could continue to manipulate her trust. She had always believed in transparency and generosity, but now, she realized, There had been a cost. With a calm precision, Linda began the process of updating every password, every login credential, one by one. The swiping of her fingers across the keyboard felt like the clicking of a lock shutting. The door was closing, slowly but surely, and she was making sure it stayed that way. She wasn't just locking out her son, she was locking out all the assumptions, the expectations, the entitlement that had built up over years of indulgence. She wasn't going to be the passive matriarch any longer. Linda picked up the phone again, dialing Sophie's number. Her granddaughter had been the one constant in all of this, quiet, steadfast, and supportive in a way that made Linda's heart ache. Sophie hadn't been swept up in the drama of entitlement and manipulation. She was different. And Linda wanted her to understand, to know that her decisions were not made out of anger. They were made out of necessity. The phone rang twice before Sophie picked up. Her voice, warm but cautious, filled the line. "Hi, Grandma." Linda's throat tightened as she fought the tinge of emotion that tried to bubble up. This was hard, harder than she'd anticipated. But Sophie had to understand. "I'm doing what I need to do, Sophie," she said, her voice steady but filled with the quiet weight of all that was unfolding. "I know you don't like it, but this is the only way forward." Sophie was silent for a moment, and Linda could almost hear the concern radiating from the other end of the line. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I know, Grandma, I don't want you to feel like you're doing this alone. I'm with you, okay?" Linda closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tenderness of Sophie's words like a balm to her worn heart. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for Sophie, so she wouldn't have to fight the same battles Linda had fought all her life. "I know you are, sweetheart," Linda replied, her voice barely a whisper. "And I promise you, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. I won't let anyone take advantage of me again." She exhaled, feeling the weight of the decision settle into her bones. This wasn't going to be easy. Travis was already furious, and Chloe's manipulations were far from over. But Linda was ready. She had spent years running numbers, analyzing every move, ensuring that no matter how hard they pushed, they wouldn't get what they wanted. Not anymore. As she hung up the phone, the resolve in her chest hardened. She wasn't going to be a passive player in her own life anymore. If her family thought they could keep taking, keep manipulating, they were sorely mistaken. The lines were drawn, and with that, Linda Gale set her plans into motion. No more hesitation, no more second-guessing. The walls had gone up, and there was no coming down. She was done being the target. From now on, she was the one who would decide how the game was played. The silence in the house felt different now, heavy, expectant, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The first move had been made. The house was still, but Linda could feel the tension building with every passing moment. The phone call with Marcus had already set the wheels in motion, and as she sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee beside her, she could almost feel Travis's anger brewing. It was only a matter of time before he came storming through the door, demanding answers. She had been waiting for this, waiting for him to lash out. As if on cue, she heard the front door slam open, and a few seconds later, Travis appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders squared, eyes narrowed with a mixture of frustration and fury. Linda didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "You can't just do this, Mom," Travis barked, his voice harsh, laced with disbelief. "You can't just pull the rug out from under me. After everything I've done for you, everything we've been through together." Linda's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. She had heard this speech 1,000 times before. He always played the same card, the one that made her feel like she owed him something. But she wasn't going to play along anymore. Not this time. I didn't pull anything out from under you. Travis, she replied, her tone firm, steady. You said you didn't owe me updates. So, I stopped enabling you. His jaw clenched, and Linda could see the muscles in his neck strain under the pressure of his frustration. His hands balled into fists at his sides, but he took a deep breath, trying to rein in his temper. You can't just take everything away from me like this. You have no idea what this is doing to me. Linda's gaze never wavered. She was done with the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation. You were never standing on it, Travis, she said, her voice low but cutting. I was carrying it, and now, I'm done. There was a long, charged silence. For a moment, Travis seemed to freeze, his face shifting between disbelief and anger. But instead of an outburst, he let out a breath, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a hiss. Fine. Keep doing this. Keep treating me like the bad guy. I'll figure it out without you. Linda's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had heard this before too. He'd retreat, fume, plot his next move in private. But this time, Linda wasn't going to let him have the last word. She was done being the fall guy. You won't figure it out, she said quietly, almost to herself. Not without me, anyway. Before Travis could respond, the phone rang. It was Jenny. Linda didn't answer it immediately, instead staring at the device with cold indifference. She knew exactly what this was. Jenny calling to complain, to pressure her into reversing the decisions she had just made. It was always the same with them. Travis crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes never leaving Linda. You're not going to answer that? Linda took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the phone. Without a word, she answered the call. Hello? She said, her voice perfectly neutral. Jenny's voice came through, laced with fake sweetness but dripping with sarcasm. Linda, you need to fix this. Travis is losing it. He's been working his butt off for you for years, and you just cut him off like that? Do you really think this is the way to handle things? Linda felt a flash of irritation, but she kept her tone even. You're right, Jenny. I'm sure Travis has done a lot, but you've both been taking advantage of my generosity for too long. I'm done enabling that behavior. On the other end of the line, Jenny's gasp was audible. You can't just make decisions like that. You're ruining everything. Nothing is ruined, Linda replied, her voice hardening. I'm simply putting things in order, and I'm not going to apologize for that. There was a pause, and Jenny's voice came through again, quieter now, but with a thin edge of desperation. Linda, please, I'm asking you to reconsider. For Travis's sake, don't destroy what you've built. Don't let it all fall apart. Linda's patience was wearing thin. She didn't need to hear this again. I'm not apologizing, Jenny, she said, her voice sharp, and I'm not changing my mind. You both need to accept that. This is my decision, and it's final. She hung up the phone before Jenny could say another word. The silence in the room seemed to settle around them, thick and heavy. Travis stood there, fuming, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but Linda cut him off. Enough. Travis, she said, her voice firm, unyielding. I've given you more than enough chances to fix things. But now I'm done. I'm taking control of my own life, and you can either get on board or you can get out of the way. Travis's lips twitched as if he were about to retort, but he just clenched his jaw instead. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room. Linda watched him leave, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. The silence that followed was absolute. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the quiet after the storm, a storm that had been a long time coming. As Linda stood there, she knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, she was on the right side of it. And Travis? He was going to learn the hard way just how far Linda Gale was willing to go to protect herself. The silence in the house deepened, but in Linda's heart, there was something else. Something like peace. The first real peace she had felt in a long time. The game was far from over. But Linda was ready for whatever came next. The office was dimly lit, the heavy oak desk in front of Linda offering a sense of stability she hadn't felt in years. The walls around her were adorned with certificates, family pictures, and antique clocks, markers of a life meticulously built. Carol sat across from her, flipping through a thick stack of papers, her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. It was the kind of room where decisions were made, and Linda had made one, a decision that would forever alter the course of her family's future. "Are we sure about this?" Carol asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I mean, this could escalate quickly, Linda. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about the family legacy." Linda's fingers tapped rhythmically against the surface of the desk, the sound steady, almost meditative. She had been thinking about this moment for weeks, the quiet withdrawal, the careful recalibration of her life. Travis had pushed her too far, and now it was time for him to learn just how little control he truly had. But there was one thing he still didn't understand. It wasn't about money. It never had been. "No, Carol," Linda replied, her voice clear and unwavering. "It's about respect. And Travis doesn't get to inherit what he never earned." Her eyes darkened with resolve, as if the words themselves forged a barrier between the past and the future. "He thinks this is about money. But it's not. It's about what he never gave me. What he never gave anyone." Carol nodded, pulling a final document from the stack and sliding it across the desk. Linda reached for the papers, her fingers grazing the crisp edges, as if signing them would solidify the new order of things. Her heart, though steady on the outside, was pounding inside her chest. This was the line in the sand. Sophie, her granddaughter, would now be the heir to everything she had built. A legacy based not on entitlement but on real values. "I've added the maturity clause," Carol said, tapping the document for emphasis. "Sophie will inherit everything when she turns 25, but she'll need to prove her worth in the meantime." Linda smiled faintly, a knowing glimmer in her eyes. "Sophie doesn't need to prove anything to me. She's the one who sees through all the games. She's the one who isn't blinded by entitlement." Carol sighed, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. "I just want you to be prepared, Linda. Travis isn't going to take this lying down. He'll fight you. And he's good at it. He's your son, after all." Linda leaned back in her chair, staring at the documents in front of her. The signature lines felt like a weight on her fingertips. And yet, at the same time, they offered an undeniable sense of clarity. This was her choice, her decision. No more standing by, no more taking the back seat while others made demands. No more allowing Travis to make her feel like she was somehow to blame for his failures. "I know," Linda said slowly, her voice low but firm. "I've spent too many years trying to keep him happy, trying to make him understand, but now it's time for him to see what happens when you lose respect. If he thinks this is about money, he's wrong. This is about something much deeper." She glanced at the paper, her hand reaching out to sign, but she hesitated for a moment. The silence in the room felt dense, almost suffocating, but it was also the calm before the storm. She was ready, and this time there was no turning back. Carol watched her carefully, sensing the weight of Linda's decision. "Are you sure about Sophie?" she asked quietly. "You know how it could look. To others." Linda's gaze hardened, her eyes narrowing as she took in Carol's words. "Sophie is the only one who gets it," she said firmly. "She's the one who hasn't tried to use me, hasn't tried to manipulate me. She sees me for who I really am, and that's enough. I'm doing this for her future, Carol. She deserves better than what Travis and Jenny have turned this family into. Carol nodded, but the hesitation was still evident in her eyes. I understand. But remember, once this is done, there's no turning back. You can't undo it. If Travis wants to fight, it'll get ugly. Linda met her gaze, her jaw set with determination. Let him fight. I've spent my life giving him chances, smoothing things over, trying to protect him from his own mistakes. Now, I'm giving him what he deserves. Nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. Linda picked up the pen and signed the document with a single, deliberate stroke, sealing her decision. She placed the pen down and took a deep breath, feeling the finality of it settle in her bones. You're right, she said softly. It will get ugly. But this is what needs to happen. It's time for Travis to face the consequences of his actions. Carol watched Linda carefully, her expression softening slightly. I'm with you, Linda. You've been through so much. You deserve to have peace. Linda smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile born of resolve, not happiness. Peace comes when you stop making excuses for the people who take and take. And when they finally realize you've stopped giving, they'll understand what it really means to lose. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The plan was set. Now, all that was left was to watch it unfold. The first steps had been taken, and Linda knew that, for better or worse, everything was about to change. And as the clock ticked on, Linda's thoughts turned to Sophie, to the future she would build, free of manipulation, free of the toxic pull of her son's entitlement. She didn't know exactly how this would play out. But she did know one thing. She was no longer the victim in her own story. The game had shifted. And Linda Gale wasn't just playing anymore. She was winning. The day had been quiet. Too quiet. Like the calm before a storm. Linda sat at her kitchen counter, sipping her tea slowly as the morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. She had spent the last few hours tending to her plants, something she had always found peaceful, grounding. The steady hum of the house, the faint creak of the floors, the rustling of leaves, it all felt so far removed from the tension that had recently filled her life. Yet, even in this moment of calm, she could sense the storm brewing outside her sanctuary. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. She glanced at it and saw a message from Carol. The legal changes are all in effect. No more access to accounts for Travis. Everything is locked down. Linda read the message twice, allowing the weight of the words to settle over her. Her decision was final. There was no going back. But she wasn't the only one who had to face the consequences. Travis was pacing, his frustration palpable. His phone was pressed to his ear, his face flushed with irritation as he spoke to the insurance company. I don't understand why the payment wasn't processed, he snapped, his voice rising in anger. There's no way my card should have been declined. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. Sir, the payment didn't go through. Your account has an overdue balance, and we've applied the standard late fees. Travis slammed the phone down with a force that rattled the countertop. His hands were shaking as he typed in the password to his bank account, his breath quickening. When the login screen loaded, he was met with the dreaded words, "Access denied." He tried again, and again. But the result was the same. Denied. His stomach lurched as realization hit him like a freight train. Linda had locked him out of everything. The account he had relied on for years was no longer available to him. The money he had grown accustomed to was gone. With a deep breath, he tried to maintain control. But the heat of anger and humiliation was rising in his chest. He couldn't believe it, not after all these years of what he'd done for her, what he'd sacrificed. And now, this. He was left with nothing. His grip tightened around his phone. The screen cracked in several places from the force of his anger. Across the room, Jenny sat, her eyes glued to her phone, but she could feel the shift in the air. She heard Travis's sharp exhale, the way he moved around the house like a caged animal. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She already knew. "You're kidding me," she muttered, scrolling through her messages as if checking for some sort of confirmation. Her eyes narrowed. She really did it. Travis turned to her, his face twisted with rage. "I told you she'd go this far," he spat. "She's taking everything from us. Everything." Jenny stood up, throwing her phone down on the table, her voice rising. "This isn't about the money, it's about control. She's trying to take back what's hers, but at our expense." Travis stared at her, his fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the anger bubbling over, like a pot left on the stove for too long. "It's not fair," he growled. "She can't just do this. She can't take everything away from us like this." Jenny crossed her arms, pacing in small, tight steps. "You don't get it, do you?" she said sharply, stopping in front of him. "It's not just about the money. She's punishing us for everything we've done. And it's not just your fault. It's mine too." Her voice wavered, the weight of their losses beginning to sink in. Travis shot her a bitter look, his anger flaring. "No, it's not your fault, it's hers. She's the one who's been pushing me all these years. I can't believe she's really doing this." Upstairs, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, her face pale and tense. She had overheard the argument from her room, the raised voices and the tension that now seemed to permeate the entire house. She wasn't surprised, not really. Her parents had been spiraling for weeks, and she could feel it. The distance between them, the blame, the resentment that seemed to linger in every corner of their conversations. She sighed deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. Sophie wasn't embarrassed by her grandmother. Not at all. It wasn't Linda who was the problem. It was everything that had led to this point. The years of manipulation, the constant power plays, the toxic air that had started to suffocate the family she had once loved so much. She wasn't sure what she should do. The fight wasn't hers to fight. But she could feel it, deep down. Everything was about to change, and she wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. Meanwhile, Linda had returned to her plants, methodically watering the ferns in the corner of the room. She hadn't felt any desire to intervene in Travis and Jenny's argument. Let them fight. Let them burn themselves out. This was the price of entitlement, and Linda had given them every chance to prove they were capable of responsibility. Now, they were learning the consequences of their actions. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text from Carol. "Everything is locked down. The changes are final." Linda read the text twice, nodding to herself as she put the phone down. Her heart remained calm, though her thoughts churned. Travis would fight back. But she knew she had made the right choice. The final step had been taken. There was no going back. She moved through the house with an eerie sense of calm, the kind that came with certainty. The house wasn't quiet anymore, but the chaos unfolding around her no longer had the power to shake her. The storm was only beginning, but Linda Gale was ready, and for the first time in years she could feel herself standing tall. The house was still, almost too still. The only sound that broke the silence was the occasional creak of the floorboards under Linda's feet as she moved about her kitchen. Her hands worked methodically, tidying up, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The dusting was just an excuse to keep moving, to avoid the heaviness settling in her chest. The storm was coming. She could feel it building, gathering force just outside her front door. Travis arrived without warning. The sound of his truck tires skidding on the gravel driveway signaled his arrival, his presence filling the house like an explosion. The door slammed open with a force that rattled the kitchen windows, the air tense with the weight of his anger. Linda didn't turn from the counter, where she was still cleaning the coffee machine. She didn't need to look at him to know what was coming. She had been expecting it. "Mom." Travis's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "You're messing with things you don't understand." His words hit the air like gunshots, and Linda's fingers faltered for just a moment as she wiped down the counter. She took a breath, a long, controlled inhale, and continued her work. His outbursts were predictable at this point. His need for control, his belief that he was entitled to what she had built, it was also familiar. "I understand," she replied calmly, her voice steady, unshaken. "That you've spent 5 years on my name." She didn't look at him, didn't need to. The words felt right, the truth of them sitting heavily between them. He was trying to use her name, her resources, to cover up his own failures. He was trying to ride her coattails while she held the reins, and he wasn't going to like where those reins were going now. Travis stood there for a moment, frozen. His eyes, wild with anger, burned into the back of her head, but Linda didn't flinch. She'd made her decision, and nothing he said would change it now. "You can't just take everything from me," he growled, stepping closer, his voice growing louder, more desperate. "You can't cut me off like this. You're ruining everything I've worked for." Linda set down the cloth and slowly turned to face him. The air between them crackled with tension. She took him in, standing there, full of rage and entitlement, his fists clenched at his sides. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, the veins in his neck pulsing with his anger. "You ruined my peace first, Travis," she replied, her voice firm, like the last stone falling into place. Her gaze was unyielding, locking with his in a silent battle of wills. Travis recoiled, his mouth opening as if to speak, but he faltered, his anger bubbling just below the surface, uncertain how to respond to the calmness of her words. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the weak, indulgent mother who had let him walk all over her. No, she was something else now. The silence stretched for a long moment. The only sound was the heavy breathing that hung in the air, thick and oppressive. But before Travis could recover, Linda's eyes flicked toward the window. She could see the faint outlines of neighbors peeking from behind their blinds, curious eyes watching the spectacle unfold. They had all seen the signs, the tension, the simmering resentment. And now it was playing out right in front of them. She could practically hear their whispered gossip, the muttered judgments. But Linda didn't care. Let them watch. Let them talk. She had lived her life in the shadows of her son's expectations for too long, and now she was reclaiming her space. She wasn't going to back down. Not for them, not for him. She turned her back on Travis, resuming her task with an air of finality, her movements calm and deliberate. She had made her decision. There was no turning back. "I've given you more than enough chances, Travis," she said over her shoulder, her voice unwavering. "Now it's my turn. You can either accept this and learn to stand on your own, or you can leave." The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. She could feel Travis's frustration building, could sense the storm in his chest, but she didn't flinch. She had already won. Travis stood there, his mouth opening and closing, as if searching for something to say. But there was nothing left for him. His mind was racing, scrambling to find a way out of the corner she had backed him into. But it was too late. He had played his cards, and now it was time to face the consequences. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floors, each one louder than the last. Linda heard the door slam shut behind him, but she didn't react. She stayed focused, finishing her task with quiet precision, her heart steady, the weight of the moment already behind her. Upstairs, Sophie stood in the doorway of her room, watching the scene unfold below. Her expression was unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had seen it all, the anger, the frustration, the tension. But she had also seen something else. Her grandmother's strength. Sophie didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to add to the noise. Linda's actions spoke louder than any words could. As the silence returned to the house, Sophie walked downstairs, her feet light on the floor. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking at Linda, who was now watering her plants as though nothing had happened. The calm was almost surreal, like the world had returned to a place of order after a storm had passed. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Sophie asked softly, her voice full of concern. Linda looked up from her plants, meeting Sophie's gaze. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that spoke volumes. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Linda replied quietly, her voice steady. "And everything's going to be fine." The game had changed. Linda had set her boundaries, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one she had just weathered. But now, with Sophie by her side, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in years: control. And she was ready to hold on to it, no matter what. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the tall windows, bathing the room in a golden hue. Linda sat at her desk, the thick stack of documents in front of her, the weight of her decision sinking in with every passing minute. The house was quiet now, but the silence was only temporary. She could feel it in the air. The tension was thick, palpable. She had done it. The final steps were in motion, and there was no turning back now. Across the room, Carol sat with her usual calm, her glasses perched at the end of her nose as she reviewed the documents Linda had signed. The trust had been updated. Travis had been removed, his name nowhere to be found in the final draft. Linda had made sure of that. Sophie, her granddaughter, was now the primary beneficiary, with a maturity clause attached. She would inherit everything when she turned 25, but only after proving she understood the responsibility that came with it. As Linda skimmed the page one last time, her fingers trembled slightly. It wasn't fear, but the realization that this was truly it. This would change everything. It had to. Carol cleared her throat, breaking Linda's thoughts. "The revocation of Travis's access has been formalized. He won't be able to touch any of your accounts. Everything is locked down. It's done." Linda nodded, her gaze fixed on the documents. "Good. He's had every chance to prove himself. Now it's time for Sophie to show what she's made of." Just as Linda was about to add something else, the sound of a door slamming echoed from downstairs. She didn't need to look up to know what was coming. It was him. Travis. She heard his heavy footsteps storming up the stairs, the familiar sound of his anger growing louder as he approached. And then, with a force that made the walls tremble, he was at the door. Without knocking, he burst into the room, his face red with fury, eyes burning with betrayal. "You can't do this." Travis's voice was a raw growl, thick with anger and disbelief. "This is my inheritance. I've worked for this. I've sacrificed for this. And now you're just going to throw me out like I'm nothing?" Linda didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She had heard it all before. The manipulation, the sense of entitlement. It was all so predictable. But this time, she wasn't backing down. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with a calmness that contrasted sharply with his rage. "You didn't work for anything, Travis. You've been riding on my back, using my name for years. You never earned it." He took a step toward her, his fists clenched, his jaw grinding in frustration. "You've gone too far this time, Mom. I don't care how much you try to control everything. I won't let you take everything from me." Linda remained seated, unshaken. "You can't take what you never had, Travis, and you certainly can't demand respect that you never gave me." His face contorted with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I'm your son. How can you do this to me?" His voice cracked on the last words, revealing the vulnerability beneath the anger. But Linda wasn't moved. "You were never standing on your own 2 feet," she replied, her voice low and steady. "I was carrying you. And now, I'm done." The room was silent for a beat, the tension heavy in the air. Travis stood there, panting with anger, looking as if he were about to explode. But instead, he just clenched his fists tighter and turned toward the desk, his gaze locking onto the stack of documents in front of her. His eyes narrowed. "What is this?" he sneered, picking up the papers with trembling hands. His gaze skimmed the page, his face going pale as he saw the updated trust. "You've cut me out of everything. There's nothing left for me." Jenny's voice echoed from the doorway, sharp and high-pitched, a familiar tone of outrage. "You can't do this, Linda!" she shouted. "This is a betrayal!" Linda didn't even glance at Jenny. Her attention remained on Travis, watching him as he struggled to comprehend what was unfolding in front of him. The documents he held in his hands were the key to his loss, the final stroke of reality he had been trying to avoid for so long. Sophie stepped quietly into the room, her presence barely noticed at first, until she caught sight of the fury on Travis's face and the quiet, unyielding calm that radiated from Linda. She stood still for a moment, taking it all in, her father's fury, her grandmother's stoic resolve. Travis dropped the papers onto the table with an almost violent motion, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet room. His voice, though thick with rage, cracked slightly. "She didn't do this out of anger, did she?" He turned to Sophie, his eyes wild. "She did this because you forced her, didn't you? You're behind this, aren't you?" Sophie's face flushed, but she didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "She didn't do this because of you, Dad. She did this because of everything you've done." Her words hung in the air, weighted with truth. "She didn't take anything from you. She's just stopped giving you what you've been taking from her for years." Travis's expression faltered, the full weight of his actions settling in as he looked from Sophie to Linda. His chest heaved as he tried to find something, anything, that would undo the damage. But there was nothing. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. Sophie let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging slightly as the tension lifted, but Linda remained unmoved. She didn't need to engage with Travis any longer. She had made her point. It was over. Sophie walked over to Linda, standing by her side as she glanced down at the discarded papers on the desk. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. Linda looked up at her granddaughter, a small, knowing smile on her lips. This was the only way forward. The storm had passed, but the damage had been done. Travis had lost his battle, but it was far from the end of the war. Linda watched the door where Travis had exited, her mind already moving ahead. This was just the beginning. The evening was cold, the sky outside darkening with the weight of an impending storm, though the house remained quiet, almost serene. Linda sat by the fireplace, the soft crackle of the flames the only sound in the room. The dim light flickered across her features, casting shadows that danced and played across her face. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly clasped together, the peace of the moment settling into her bones. She had made her decision. Now, she just had to wait. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen, expecting another message from Carol, perhaps an update on the legal changes that were still being finalized. But it was not Carol. The message came from Travis. The name appeared on the screen like a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. The message was long, too long. She opened it with a steady hand, knowing exactly what it would be. Apologies. Regrets. The same words he had thrown at her countless times before, each one empty and hollow. "Mom, I know I've done things to hurt you. I'm sorry for how things have gone. I've always had your best interests at heart. I need some time to get things together. Please understand, I didn't mean to push you away. I hope you can forgive me. I've always appreciated everything you've done for me, and I still want to make things right." Linda's eyes scanned the words, feeling an old, familiar ache. The sincerity of the apology felt like a fragile lie, a thin veil draped over his desperate need to regain control. She knew better than to believe in this sudden remorse. The words stung, but they weren't unexpected. She closed the message, her fingers slow and deliberate as she tapped the screen to delete it. Her pulse didn't quicken, her chest didn't tighten. The decision had already been made, and this message, did nothing but reaffirm what she had already known. The room was still. But for the first time in what felt like years, Linda felt calm. The choice had been hers, and she had stood firm. She wasn't going to be manipulated again. She wasn't going to give in to guilt. Not this time. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Carol. Linda opened the message with a quiet sense of relief, knowing that Carol, as always, would have the legal perspective she needed. The no contact request is drafted. I've also included a provision for all future communications to go through legal counsel. You won't have to deal with them directly again unless absolutely necessary. It's all in place. You're protected. Linda nodded to herself. Carol's words were always practical, always right. The decision had been made. No more direct contact. No more playing the game of emotional manipulation. It was done. Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was from Jenny. Linda had been waiting for this moment. She knew it was coming. Jenny's messages were never simple. They were always laced with emotional weight, a strategy to keep Linda tied to the chaos. Linda didn't hesitate. She opened the message. Linda, I don't understand what you're doing. This is tearing our family apart. We need you. Travis needs you. Please, can't we just talk about this? This isn't the way to handle things. It's all falling apart, and I don't want to lose you. Linda's hand tightened around her phone, the screen starting to blur from the tension in her grip. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her thumb swiping to the side to block Jenny's number. It was a simple act, but it felt momentous, like the final stroke on a canvas that had been years in the making. She didn't need this. She didn't need the manipulation, the guilt trips, the constant barrage of emotional pleas. What had they ever given her except resentment and endless demands? She had spent decades smoothing over their messes, putting out their fires, bending to their wills. But not anymore. Not now. Another notification popped up. This time it was from Travis again. Another message. This time with a picture of their old family home, the one they had once shared together. A picture that held 1,000 memories. Memories Travis had never truly appreciated. The caption was simple. I miss you, Mom. Linda stared at the image, her heart heavy, but not with sadness, with finality. She could see the house, the place where so many battles had been fought, the place that had never been a true home for her, only a battleground. The old house was nothing more than a symbol now, a relic of a life that she had outgrown. She let the message linger on her screen for a moment longer before swiping it away, no longer needing to hold on to it. It was just another empty gesture, another lie. She wouldn't be swayed. She wouldn't let herself be dragged back into the chaos, into the endless cycle of broken promises and false remorse. The silence in the house was louder now. The phone screen was dark. The storm outside was still, but inside, Linda felt a strange peace. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one who had taken control, and whatever came next, she was ready. She set the phone down and turned her gaze to the window, watching as the first raindrops began to fall against the glass. The storm outside was real, but it was nothing compared to the one she had already weathered. Linda Gale had made her choice. Now, the rest of the world would have to live with it. The house felt emptier today, as if the walls had absorbed all the noise from the past few weeks, and now stood still, holding their breath. Linda sat in her study, her eyes fixed on the computer screen in front of her. The slow hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room, its cool breeze a small relief from the heat of the decisions she had made. She wasn't new to financial moves. She had spent years handling numbers, crafting deals, and watching people fight for what they wanted. But this was different. This wasn't just about securing a future. It was about drawing a line in the sand. A line Travis would not cross again. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, the cursor blinking on the screen like a ticking clock. She clicked. Freeze. The 3 credit bureaus now held Linda Gale's finances in an ironclad grip. Travis's access was cut off. Any attempt at drawing from her accounts would be met with immediate denial. No more. No more hidden charges, no more excuses. This was her move, and there was no going back. The screen before her showed the successful confirmation of the freezes. Her chest tightened with the weight of finality. She wasn't sure whether the sudden release of tension was a relief or the beginning of something worse. The storm she had fought to avoid was now upon her, but she felt a strange calm wash over her. The battlefield was no longer the murky past. It was now a calculated future. Linda sat back in her chair, her thoughts drifting to the last few weeks. The messages from Travis, each one laden with fake remorse, and the dramatic emotional tirades from Jenny, who had refused to see the truth. Every move they made had been designed to pull her back into the chaos. But Linda had been unyielding. She was done. She had taken back control. The phone buzzed next to her, interrupting her moment of stillness. It was Carol. Everything's locked down, Linda. No access. No exceptions. It's all in place. A sense of reassurance flooded through Linda. Carol had always been her steady hand in moments like these, and now, with the legal documentation in place, everything was buttoned up. There was no more vulnerability, no more chinks in the armor. But before Linda could sit back in relief, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Jenny. Linda read the message without a moment's hesitation. Linda, you've destroyed this family. How could you do this? This isn't about protection. This is vengeance. You're tearing us apart, and you're ruining everything Travis and I have worked for. Don't you care about any of us? The words stung, but Linda's resolve remained unmoved. Jenny's manipulative tone was just another attempt to drag her back into a spiral of guilt. Linda could hear the undercurrent of her voice in the text, the sense of entitlement, the belief that Linda owed them both an endless supply of forgiveness. Linda smiled to herself, a small, almost sad smile. She had heard these words too many times to be fooled by them anymore. This isn't about destroying anyone, Linda texted back with quiet finality. It's about protecting myself. You'll understand when this is over. She hit send, knowing that this was the last communication Jenny would get for a while. There was no more room for apologies, no more negotiating. Linda had finally realized that she had spent too many years trying to protect people who wouldn't protect her in return. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Travis. She almost didn't pick up, but then, with a sense of finality, she answered. Mom. Travis's voice crackled through the line, his frustration palpable. I know what you've done. You've frozen everything. You've cut me off completely. Linda didn't speak for a moment. She allowed the weight of his words to hang in the air. Then, in a calm, controlled voice, she replied, I've given you everything I could, Travis. More than you deserved. His response was immediate, desperate. You can't just leave me out in the cold like this. You can't shut me out when I need you most. I've been your son for all these years. Don't I deserve something? Linda's grip tightened on the phone, but her voice remained steady, unflinching. You've never stood on your own, Travis. You've been using me, manipulating me, and it's been too much for too long. I'm not your backup anymore. I'm done. There was a long silence, and then Travis spoke again, his words low and venomous. "You'll regret this. You'll regret cutting me off. This isn't over, Mom. I'll figure out a way to fix this." Linda inhaled slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. She wasn't angry. She was done. "Do whatever you want, Travis," she said softly but firmly. "But I'm not going to let you destroy me anymore." The line went dead. Linda didn't feel a surge of triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter, more resolute. Her plan was working, and the storm that had raged for so long was beginning to die down. But as the silence settled over the house again, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The damage was done. And now, Travis and Jenny had nowhere left to turn. With a steady hand, Linda updated her emergency contacts: Sophie, Carol, and Marcus. She needed the people who understood her decisions, the ones who had supported her from the start. There was no going back, but there were people she could trust. As the rain picked up outside, Linda turned her gaze toward the window, her mind already working through the next steps. Travis might fight. He might come back with all the fury he could muster. But Linda Gale had fought her way through every storm, and this one would be no different. The game had changed, and she was ready for whatever came next. The weight of the day pressed heavily on Linda's shoulders, but the satisfaction of knowing she had made the right decision fueled her resolve. The house was quiet, but it was a controlled quiet, like the calm after the storm, the silence that follows a long-awaited victory. She sat in her study, her desk now free of the clutter that had once accumulated with every passing day of stress. The documents were all neatly filed, the evidence she had painstakingly gathered ready to be used. Every payment, every document, every conversation, it was all there. Every piece of the puzzle was in place. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she compiled the final records, cross-referencing accounts and transactions. A year of manipulation, of resentment, of feeling trapped. She had turned it all into something solid, something irrefutable. The evidence was unassailable. Travis had no case. The lawyer he had hired, sleazy, ambitious, and far too used to manipulating situations, would find himself backed into a corner. Linda's phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. It was from Carol, the final piece of the legal puzzle slipping into place. "The lawyer is backing off. He's seen the evidence, and he knows your case is airtight. He's withdrawing. The case is dropped." Linda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The sense of finality settled over her like a warm blanket, a strange comfort amidst the storm of emotions swirling in her mind. She wasn't just winning the fight, she was ending it. And Travis would have to face the reality of his actions, with no more excuses, no more manipulations. She stood, pacing toward the window as the rain continued to pour down, the sky dark and heavy outside, mirroring the turmoil inside her son. He had underestimated her at every turn, thought she was just a soft, indulgent mother who could be manipulated into submission. But she had learned the hard way. And now she was taking back control. And she was doing it with precision. As the storm raged outside, Linda's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sophie. "Grandma, did you hear? It's over, right?" Linda smiled faintly at the message, feeling a surge of pride for the young woman who had stood by her side, who had quietly supported her in every decision. Sophie had always been the one who truly understood Linda's choices, the one who never demanded anything more than respect. She responded quickly, her fingers dancing over the screen. "Yes, it's over. No more lies, no more manipulation. It's done." Sophie's reply was swift, a burst of warmth in the sea of cold decisions. "This is what accountability looks like, Grandma. You showed them." Linda's lips curved into a small smile. "This is what financial literacy looks like," she typed back, her words carrying weight. Sophie had always known the value of money, of hard work, of responsibility. Linda was giving her more than just the family legacy. She was giving her the keys to a future that would not be clouded by the mistakes of those who came before her. Linda sat back down at her desk, her mind clear now, her purpose firm. She picked up the living trust document and glanced over it once more, making sure everything was in order. The terms were clear. The conditions were set. There would be no further challenges. Not from Travis. Not from anyone. As she reviewed the document, a sense of peace settled over her. She wasn't just putting the past behind her. She was creating something new, something strong, something that wouldn't be shaken by the petty fights of an entitled son. Sophie would inherit everything, but on her own terms, not because of her bloodline, but because she understood the value of respect, responsibility, and hard work. The phone buzzed once more, and Linda saw the name on the screen, Marcus. She answered with a steady hand, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of everything that had led her here. Marcus. Linda, he replied, his voice gravelly but warm. I just wanted to confirm that everything's locked down. You're fully protected now. No more access from Travis. The changes have been confirmed. You can rest easy. Linda took a slow breath, allowing the relief to wash over her, though her thoughts remained sharp. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. You've done it, Linda, Marcus added, his tone approving but guarded. You've taken back control. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Linda smiled softly, the edges of her lips curling upward. No one will. Not now. The line went silent for a moment as Linda absorbed the weight of the words. Then she stood, walking over to the window once more, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. She was standing firm now, unshaken, and as she looked out at the storm raging outside, she knew that she had already weathered far worse. But this time, she wasn't just surviving. She was winning. And for the first time in a long while, Linda Gale felt the power of her choices settle in her chest, a quiet fire burning with certainty. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. But she had taken the first step toward a future where she was in control, where the power no longer belonged to the ones who had drained her. The storm raged on outside, but inside Linda Gale there was nothing but peace. For now, she could finally breathe. The game was hers to win. The silence in Linda's study was suffocating, but in a way that felt like liberation. She sat by the window, watching the rain beat against the glass, the steady patter almost soothing in its rhythm. The storm outside mirrored the chaos of the past weeks, the arguments, the guilt, the manipulation. But now, as the rain poured down in torrents, it felt like a cleansing. She had made the hardest decisions of her life, and now, with every passing moment, those decisions were starting to solidify in her mind. There was no going back. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a voicemail from Jenny. Linda's fingers hovered over the phone, but without hesitation, she pressed the trash icon. The voicemail was gone, erased from her life, just like the endless pleas Jenny had been sending. The quiet click of the voicemail disappearing was final, almost satisfying. There was nothing left for her to hear. Jenny's voice, always laden with guilt and manipulation, no longer had any power over her. Linda had given too much for too long. She didn't need to listen to the same hollow apologies again. She had heard them all before. This time, Linda wasn't going to fall for it. Not again. Her thoughts were interrupted when Sophie stepped into the study. She had been quietly observing her grandmother, sensing the heavy silence that had taken over the house. Sophie stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to approach, but she needn't have worried. Linda looked up at her, her expression calm, her face unreadable, but Sophie could see the quiet strength radiating from her grandmother. "They don't get to treat you like this anymore," Sophie said softly, her voice full of quiet resolve. She had seen her grandmother suffer in silence, seen the toll years of manipulation had taken on Linda's soul. But now, as she looked at the woman who had always been so strong, Sophie could see something else, something harder, more resilient. Linda's lips parted as if to speak, but she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded. "I let them once," she said, her voice steady, though there was a hardness behind her words. "Never again." The weight of those words hung in the room, heavy with meaning. Linda wasn't just speaking about her son and daughter-in-law. She was speaking about all the years she had spent putting everyone else's needs above her own, smoothing over their messes, accepting their blame. But no more. That life was over. The boundaries had been drawn. She wasn't their punching bag, their emotional support system anymore. She was Linda Gale, and she had taken control. Sophie stepped forward and sat down next to her grandmother. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of concern. Sophie wasn't used to seeing Linda this calm, this resolute. It was a quiet confidence that Sophie had always admired, but now she could see it. Her grandmother had truly taken her life back. Linda let out a soft breath, her gaze still fixed on the window. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady, "and everything's going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she knew there was still work to do. She wasn't naive enough to believe this would all go away with one final confrontation. Travis would fight. Jenny would continue to try to manipulate her. But Linda had prepared for this moment. She had already locked everything down. No more credit attempts, no more manipulations. Everything was secure, and the final pieces were in place. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Marcus. Linda didn't hesitate. She picked it up, the sound of his voice a steady reassurance. "Linda, everything's locked down, I've made sure of it. No further credit applications from Travis. Everything is in place. You're protected." Linda closed her eyes for a moment, the tension easing from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she felt like she could finally breathe. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "We've got your back," Marcus replied, "and I'm just a phone call away." Linda hung up the phone, the reality of her actions settling in. She had taken the final steps. The legal documents were secure, the credit freeze was in place, and her trust was now completely in Sophie's hands. There were no more surprises, no more chances for Travis to manipulate her. The fight was over. She looked over at Sophie, who was still sitting beside her, her eyes full of quiet admiration. Linda smiled faintly, her heart swelling with pride. "You're the future now, Sophie," she said softly. "This is your legacy to carry forward." Sophie nodded, the weight of her grandmother's words settling in. She understood now what Linda had done, what sacrifices had been made. She wasn't just inheriting a legacy of wealth, she was inheriting a legacy of strength, of standing up for yourself, of not letting anyone control your life. Linda turned back to the window, her gaze lost in the rain. The storm outside hadn't stopped, but for the first time it didn't seem so daunting. She had weathered worse storms before, and she was ready for whatever came next. The game was hers to win now. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time she didn't even look at it. It didn't matter. She was done. She had made her choice, and she was no longer afraid. Linda Gale had taken control, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the storm raged on outside, Linda felt a calm certainty inside her. She was ready for whatever came next. The game had changed, and now she was in charge. The community hall buzzed with quiet excitement, the hum of conversation swirling in the air like an electric charge. The long wooden tables were adorned with simple white linens, the soft glow of overhead chandeliers casting a warm, inviting light over the gathering. Yet, amid the quiet chatter and clinking of glasses, there was a noticeable absence. The one person who should have been there. the one person who always expected to be at the center of things. Linda Gale stood at the front of the room, her posture impeccable, her face calm and composed. It was a room filled with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, people whose lives she had touched over the years. But today wasn't just any ordinary gathering. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, the final piece in the puzzle of her legacy, and the first step towards something new, something she could finally call her own. Her eyes scanned the room, and there it was again, that familiar sense of quiet power that had been missing for so long. No longer did she feel the need to shrink, to apologize for taking up space. The room was hers, and in a way, it had always been hers. The years of self-doubt, the years of being told she wasn't enough, they felt like distant echoes now, fading into the background, replaced with a newfound strength. She took a deep breath as Carol, standing at her side, handed her the final set of legacy documents. These weren't just any papers. They were the culmination of everything Linda had worked toward. The trust. The foundation she had built, not for Travis, but for Sophie. For the future. Carol's eyes met Linda's, her expression one of quiet approval. "You've earned this," Carol said softly, her voice filled with admiration. Linda smiled faintly, her gaze shifting to Sophie, who stood near the back of the room, her eyes fixed on her grandmother. The young woman's face held pride, but there was something deeper in her expression, something that spoke of quiet resolve, of knowing what had come before and what was about to come next. As Linda began to speak, her voice rang out clearly in the room. There was no hesitation, no wavering in her words. "Respect isn't owed," she said, her tone firm but measured. "It's earned, and sometimes revoked." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Linda let the words settle in, the silence stretching between them like a thread connecting her to everyone in the room. She paused, meeting the eyes of her neighbors, her friends, the people who had always respected her. But also, she thought, of Travis, of the people who hadn't. Her voice never wavered as she continued. "For too long, I let my son and his wife take from me, manipulate me, use me as a shield for their own failures. I let them think they had a right to my generosity, to my wealth, to my legacy. But today, I'm here to tell you that they didn't, and they don't." The crowd was quiet now, hanging on every word. Linda could feel the weight of their gazes, the understanding in their eyes. They knew what she had gone through, the battles, the years of being taken advantage of, the guilt trips. And they understood that this was her moment, the moment when she took back control. Sophie, standing at the back, clapped the loudest, her hands ringing through the silence. The pride in her eyes was unmistakable, not just because of what her grandmother had accomplished, but because Sophie knew in her heart that this wasn't about money. It was about power, about respect, and about making sure the next generation didn't fall into the same traps. Linda looked at Sophie, her heart swelling with emotion, and then turned back to the crowd. She could feel the room shift, the collective understanding settling in, as they all saw the finality of it. There would be no more manipulation, no more empty apologies from Travis. This was Linda's victory. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder Carol had given her. The weight of it seemed heavier than it looked, the responsibility of it anchoring her as she handed it to Sophie. The room grew even quieter, the anticipation thick in the air. "Everything is already in your name," Linda said softly, her words for Sophie alone. "Just in case." Sophie stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the folder, her expression a mixture of awe and determination. She had always known her grandmother was strong, but this was a power she had never seen before. A power not born of manipulation or entitlement, but of years of hard-earned wisdom. The weight of the moment hit Sophie fully as she held the folder in her hands. She wasn't just inheriting a family fortune. She was inheriting a legacy built on sacrifice, on standing up for herself, on knowing her worth. As the applause began, Linda stood still, her face a mask of quiet pride. She didn't need to say anything more. The moment spoke for itself. Her battle was won, and the power had shifted. Travis wasn't here. His absence wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. The room filled with applause, but for Linda, the true victory wasn't in the celebration. It wasn't in the applause or the acknowledgement. It was in the peace she had finally found. The peace of knowing she had fought for herself and her family. And now, no one could ever take that peace away. The game had shifted. And now, Linda Gale was the one in control. The evening had settled into a quiet stillness that felt almost foreign. Linda sat at the head of the dining table, the soft glow of the pendant light casting gentle shadows across the room. The house, which had been the stage for years of tension and manipulation, now felt like a sanctuary. The weight of the decisions she had made was no longer a burden. It was a shield, one she carried with quiet pride. Sophie sat across from her, her expression calm, almost serene. They had shared so many meals here, but tonight was different. There were no unresolved arguments, no looming threats, no unsaid words hanging between them. Just peace. Real peace. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and last-minute adjustments. But now, everything was in place. Sophie was officially added as a co-signer on Linda's accounts, her name beside Linda's in every document. The future was now secure. Sophie's future. The weight of the family legacy had shifted, and now it belonged to someone who truly understood the value of hard work and respect, someone who had never tried to manipulate or take advantage. Linda's fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, the red liquid catching the light as she looked at Sophie. There was something different in her granddaughter's eyes now, a sense of quiet strength that matched Linda's own. Sophie had seen it all, and yet she had never faltered. She wasn't just inheriting Linda's wealth, she was inheriting Linda's wisdom, her resilience, her unspoken understanding of what it meant to stand strong in the face of everything that tried to break you. "I'm proud of you," Linda said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of affection that was far more meaningful than words could express. "You've always been the one who saw things clearly, Sophie. And now, you'll carry the legacy forward." Sophie's eyes softened at the praise, her lips curving into a small smile. "I wouldn't have been able to do this without you, Grandma." Linda leaned back in her chair, the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. The past few months had been some of the hardest of her life, but they had also been the most transformative. No longer would she be dragged back into the chaos of Travis's entitled demands, or the emotional manipulation that Jenny had always used to keep her in line. She had broken free, and now Sophie was the one who would carry on what Linda had built, without the toxic ties that had held her back for so long. The sound of the front door closing echoed faintly in the distance, but Linda didn't flinch. She had made her peace with the past. There was no more room for the manipulations of people who had never truly respected her. Sophie's future was secure, and that was all that mattered now. The phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the quiet stillness of the room. Linda glanced at it and saw Marcus's name on the screen. Her heart gave a small, contented beat. It was a message, simple, but filled with meaning. "It's been an honor working with you," the text read. "You've done what needed to be done. You've taken control, and I'm proud to have been a part of it." Linda let out a soft breath, her chest tightening ever so slightly. She had always trusted Marcus, not just for his skill in handling the financial details, but for his steady presence, his calm in the midst of the storm. He had been one of the few people who truly understood what she was doing, who never tried to talk her out of it, who always knew that this was the only path forward. Sophie, who had been quietly watching her grandmother, smiled softly as she read the message over Linda's shoulder. "He's right, you know," Sophie said, her voice full of quiet admiration. "You've been through so much. And now look where we are. You did this, Grandma." Linda looked at Sophie, the warmth in her eyes unmistakable. "We did it," she corrected gently. "Together." The evening stretched on, the conversation light and free of tension. They spoke of the future, of Sophie's plans, of the legacy that would now be in her hands. Linda couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief, of finality. She had done everything she could for Travis, for Jenny, for the family she had once tried so hard to protect. But no more. The boundaries were set, and they would not be crossed. As they finished their meal, Linda felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. The storm outside had passed, and the storm inside her heart had long since calmed. Sophie's future was secure, free from the toxic manipulations of the past, and that was all Linda had ever wanted. Her gaze drifted out the window, watching the last remnants of daylight fade into the night. The road ahead was clear now, and she wasn't walking it alone. Linda Gale had built a legacy, not just of wealth, but of strength. A legacy that, for the first time, would pass into the hands of someone who truly understood it. And as she sat there with Sophie, the weight of the past lifting, Linda knew this was only the beginning. The game had changed. But this time, the power was hers, and nothing would ever be the same again. The late morning sun poured into the study, bathing the room in a soft golden light that felt almost surreal. Linda sat at her desk, a sense of finality hanging in the air. The quiet hum of the house seemed to echo with the weight of the decision she had made. The stack of papers before her was the last piece of the puzzle, the final proof of everything she had worked for. Today, she was finishing it all. Linda's fingers grazed over the bank statement she had printed out, the numbers glaring up at her in stark contrast to everything she had fought for. Travis's account, 0.0. She couldn't help but feel a surge of quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice in those cold, final figures. The money, the power. It had always been a means for him to control her, to manipulate her. But now, all of it was gone. She folded the paper carefully, her hands steady as she slid it into an envelope, sealing it with a simple click. The envelope felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of all the years of sacrifice and compromise. She placed it into a drawer labeled closed. The past was now behind her. This chapter of her life had been written, and she was finished with it. Taking a deep breath, Linda leaned back in her chair, staring at the envelope with a calm sense of finality. The storm inside her heart had long passed, replaced by a quiet strength. There would be no more guilt trips, no more manipulation. The financial hold Travis had on her was gone. His attempts to control her were over. She had taken back what was hers. And Sophie. Sophie would carry this forward. Her thoughts drifted to the young woman who had stood by her side throughout this entire ordeal, the granddaughter who had never once tried to take advantage, who had simply trusted Linda to do what was right. Sophie's future was now secure, untarnished by the toxic influence of her parents. She had learned well, and now, she was ready for the life that awaited her. Linda glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. Sophie would be leaving for college today, and the reality of it hit Linda like a quiet wave. It was a moment she had both dreaded and hoped for. Sophie had always been the light in her life, the one who had reminded her of what truly mattered. But now, she would be stepping into her own future, armed with the lessons Linda had taught her, with the strength Linda had instilled in her. The front door creaked open, and Linda heard the soft footsteps of Sophie coming down the hall. Linda turned in her chair, watching as Sophie appeared in the doorway, a small suitcase in hand. her face alight with anticipation. The young woman had always been strong, but today, there was something different about her. A quiet confidence that mirrored Linda's own. "Are you ready?" Linda asked, her voice soft but steady. Sophie nodded, her eyes bright. "I think so. But I'm going to miss you." Linda's heart swelled, but she didn't let the emotion show. She stood and walked over to her granddaughter, pulling her into a warm embrace. Sophie's arms wrapped around her, and for a moment, Linda held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. The weight of the moment was not lost on her. This was it. The culmination of everything Linda had fought for. A better future for Sophie. "I'll always be here for you, sweetheart," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've earned this. You've earned everything that's coming to you." Sophie pulled back slightly, looking up at her grandmother. There was a sense of calm in her expression, as if the years of turmoil had finally passed. "I know, Grandma. I'll make you proud." Linda smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from Sophie's face. "You already have." With one final glance at the house, Sophie picked up her suitcase, ready to take the next step in her life. She walked toward the door, but not before turning back to Linda, her eyes full of gratitude. "I love you, Grandma," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too, sweetheart," Linda replied, her heart full. "Go make your future. It's waiting for you." And with that, Sophie stepped out the door, leaving Linda standing in the doorway, watching as her granddaughter walked toward the car, ready to start a new chapter. Linda could see the bright future ahead of her, one built on a foundation of hard work and strength. As Sophie's car pulled away, Linda stood there for a moment longer, watching it disappear down the street. The house felt emptier now, but it wasn't a painful emptiness. It was the emptiness that comes with a job well done. Linda had given Sophie everything she could. The lessons, the values, the legacy. And as the last of the rain clouds parted and sunlight streamed through the window, Linda turned back into the house, feeling the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. The game had shifted, and she was no longer playing by anyone's rules but her own. With a final look at the family pictures on the wall, Linda made her way back to the study, her steps purposeful. The past was closed. The future was bright. And for the first time in years, Linda Gale could finally breathe, knowing that the peace she had fought for was hers, and hers alone. The game was hers to win.